Selfish sister emptied my savings for a luxury vacation. You don't need it anyway, haha, she wrote. But the laugh didn't last long, because when she came back, I always knew my sister, Emily, was spoiled, but I never realized how far our parents would go to enable her. She was always the favorite, the one who could do no wrong. If she failed a class, the teacher was too hard. If she quit a job, it was because the boss was too demanding. If she spent all her money on useless junk, well, money comes and goes. Meanwhile, I had done everything by the book. I worked hard, saved every dollar, and made responsible decisions. My goal was simple: buy my own place and get out of that house. I had been saving for years, putting away everything I could. It wasn't easy, but I was finally there. I had just enough for a down payment. I was literally weeks away from starting the process. Since I was still living at home to save money, my parents convinced me to keep my savings in the house instead of the bank. It's safer here, they had told me. You don't have to risk anything with those big banks. It sounded ridiculous, but I trusted them. Why shouldn't I? They were my parents. Then one weekend I had to leave town for work. It wasn't anything big, just a couple of days. When I got back, the house felt different. Too quiet. No sign of Emily. No usual mess of grocery bags and half-eaten snacks on the counter. I found my parents sitting in the living room, looking suspiciously like two people with something to hide. "Where's Emily?" I asked. They exchanged a quick look, and my dad let out a deep sigh. "Look, Chris, we had to lend her some money." I frowned. "What money?" Another look between them. Then my mom said, "The money from the safe." For a moment I didn't even realize what she meant. "My money?" "Well," my dad began, "you haven't been using it, and Emily really needed a break. She's exhausted, you know. Lying around all day, not working, it was really hard on her. She needed to get her strength back before she finally gets a job." I just stared. I was waiting for them to laugh, to say it was a joke. But they didn't. "What?" I felt like I had misheard. "You took my savings, my down payment, for what? A vacation?" "Chris, don't be so dramatic," my mom said, waving her hand like it was no big deal. "It's not like you needed it right now." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had worked and saved for years for this money. I skipped nights out with friends, took extra shifts, lived as cheaply as possible, all for nothing. Worse, they didn't even feel bad. There were no apologies, no explanations beyond "Emily needed it." Just casual indifference, as if I were the unreasonable one. I stormed into my room and grabbed my cell phone. My hands shook with rage as I dialed Emily's number. She picked up after a few rings, sounding half asleep. "Hey, Chris. What's up?" "You know damn well what's up," I said. "Where's my money?" There was a short pause, then she let out a little laugh. "Oh, that? Don't worry about it. You didn't need it anyway, haha." I stared at my phone, my blood boiling. That was it? That was her answer? I took a deep breath. If that's how they wanted to play it, fine. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I sat there staring at my phone long after Emily had hung up. I replayed her words over and over. They didn't need it anyway, haha. Like my years of work and sacrifice were just a joke to her. Like my future didn't matter. I marched back into the living room, my heart pounding. My parents were still sitting there, acting as if nothing had happened. "So let me get this straight," I said. "You loaned Emily my money so she could go on vacation?" My mom sighed, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "Chris, she needed it. She's been really stressed. Stressed out from what? Lying in bed all day?" My dad shook his head. "She was trying to find the right job. That takes time. You know how hard that is for her." "Oh, yeah? It must be exhausting scrolling through Instagram all day," I snapped. "And you didn't loan her my money. You gave it to her. You'll get it back," my mom said dismissively. "She just needs some time." I let out a sharp laugh. A little time? You mean like the way she borrowed my laptop 2 years ago and I never saw it again? Or the way she borrowed money from Grandma and then ghosted her when she asked for it back? Chris, my dad warned. Don't be so hard on her. I stared at her in disbelief. This wasn't real. This had to be some kind of twisted prank. But no, they were actually sitting there, justifying stealing from me to pay for Emily's little getaway. I turned and walked away, but I wasn't done. Not even close. I went straight to the garage where my dad's car was parked. It wasn't anything fancy, just an old sedan, but it was mine. I had bought it for them 2 years ago when their last car broke down, thinking I was doing something nice. I paid for the insurance, the maintenance, everything. They treated it like their own, but technically the title was still in my name. I grabbed my spare key, got in, and drove straight to the dealership. It took less than an hour to sell it. It wasn't worth much, but I walked away with a decent chunk of change. As soon as I had the money in my hands, I felt a rush of satisfaction. But I wasn't done yet. I went back home, straight to Emily's room. The place was a disaster, clothes everywhere, half-empty coffee cups on the nightstand, a pile of unopened mail on the dresser. And then there it was, her jewelry box. Now, Emily wasn't the type to wear cheap stuff. Over the years, my parents had bought her expensive necklaces, bracelets, rings, things she rarely wore but always bragged about. I took it all. Then I left. That night I sold it all. Every single piece. By the time I was done, I had made back some of what they had taken from me. Not all of it, but enough to make my point. I didn't go home right away. I sat in my car, parked in front of a 24-hour diner, and let it all sink in. I had never done this before. I wasn't the vengeful type. But this felt right. And then my phone rang. It was my dad. I let it ring. Then my mom called. Ignored. Finally, Emily. I grinned. I knew what was coming. I picked up the phone. As soon as she heard my voice, she screamed, "Where's my jewelry?" I smiled. "Oh, that? Don't worry about it. You didn't need it anyway, haha." Then I hung up. And that's when all hell broke loose. I didn't go home that night. I checked into a cheap motel instead, just to clear my head. I knew as soon as I walked through that door, I was going to have a war on my hands. And I wasn't in the mood for their phony outrage just yet. The next morning I finally drove back, taking my time. I half expected my parents to be waiting in the driveway, but the house looked normal. Too normal. I walked in, and that's when I realized something was very wrong. Emily was sitting on the couch, clutching her phone, her face red and blotchy from crying. My mom was next to her, rubbing her back like a traumatized child. My dad, he was pacing the floor, his face unreadable. As soon as Emily saw me, she jumped up. "You psycho!" she screamed. "You sold my stuff? Who even does that?" I threw my keys on the table. "Oh, I don't know. Maybe the same kind of person who steals your life savings to pay for someone else's luxury vacation." My mom gasped, as if I had said something offensive. "Chris, that was totally different." "Oh, really?" I leaned against the wall. "Explain how." She stammered for a second, then shook her head. "Emily's things were hers. You had no right. And my money was mine. But that didn't seem to stop anyone, did it?" Before she could argue, Emily stormed over to me. "You don't get it, do you?" she hissed. "I was going to pay you back." I laughed. "With what? Your influencer career, which hasn't taken off in 5 years? Or were you planning on getting a real job for once in your life?" She screamed in frustration and threw up her hands. "Oh my God, you are such a bitter loser. It's not my fault that you hoard money like a greedy troll." That was enough. I took a slow step towards her. "Do you even hear yourself?" I asked in a dangerously low voice. "You think I'm greedy? I worked for this money. I earned every single cent. While you were sitting on your ass doing nothing, I was pulling double shifts, skipping nights out, eating cheap instant noodles just so I could afford my own place. And you? You just took it. Like it was nothing. And now you want to cry because I took a fraction of what you stole? Grow up, Emily. Her jaw clenched. You had no right, Dash. I cut her off. Neither did you. My dad finally spoke. Chris, let's all calm down. We can work this out. I turned to him and crossed my arms. Oh? And how are you going to do that? We're going to talk to Emily, he said. She'll find a way to pay you back. Emily scoffed. Excuse me? She will, he snapped. We're not going to let this turn into a family feud. Family feud? I let out a bitter laugh. Dad, it already is. And then, before my parents could say anything else, the doorbell rang. We all froze. Emily frowned. Who the hell is that? My mom stood up and peeked through the window. Then she gasped. Oh no. I went over and looked outside. It was our neighbor, Mr. Dawson. Now, Mr. Dawson wasn't just some random guy from next door. He had lived there for years and knew all about our family. He was a retired lawyer, and he didn't take any nonsense. I had always been friendly with him, and we had talked many times about my plans to buy a house. And now he was standing on our porch with his hands in his pockets, looking completely unamused. Emily turned to me, her eyes wide open. What the hell did you do? I just smiled. I opened the door. Hey, Mr. Dawson. Chris, he said with a nod, then looked inside. Mind if I come in? I stepped aside. He came in, took one look at my parents and Emily, then let out a sigh. I heard about what happened, he said, looking directly at my father. And I have to say, I'm disappointed. My father bristled. It's none of your business. Maybe not, Mr. Dawson agreed. But when I see someone stealing from their own son, I tend to get involved. Emily crossed her arms. He stole from me first. Mr. Dawson raised an eyebrow. You mean the jewelry your parents bought for you? That you didn't even pay for yourself? She opened her mouth, then closed it. Mr. Dawson turned to me. Chris, I have a good lawyer friend who handles cases like this. If you want, we can take legal action. The room fell silent. My dad's face went pale. My mom looked like she was going to faint. And Emily? She looked like she had just swallowed a lemon. I grinned. Tell me more. Emily turned on me like a wild animal. You want to sue your own family? I shrugged. They stole everything I worked for. Why wouldn't I? Mr. Dawson, completely unfazed by the chaos, pulled out his phone. It's simple, really. What they did was theft. You had an agreement to put your life savings in the safe, assuming it was safe. Instead, they took it without authorization. If you want to move forward, we can file a lawsuit. And given the amount stolen, this wouldn't be small claims court, we're talking grand larceny. My father stiffened. Well, hold on. Mr. Dawson cut him off. And before you say, we're family, this shouldn't be a legal matter, let me remind you, family or not, stealing is stealing. The room fell silent. My dad's fists clenched, my mom was on the verge of tears, and Emily, she was shaking. With rage. Then, suddenly, she let out a laugh. A strange, almost hysterical laugh. You're so full of yourself. She spat, stepping toward Mr. Dawson. You think you're some kind of hero, standing up for Chris? Newsflash, old man, this has nothing to do with you. Mr. Dawson didn't flinch. Oh, but it does. And then he pulled something out of his pocket. A check. He handed it to me. I know it doesn't cover everything, but consider it a loan. No interest, no deadline. Just get out of here. My breath caught in my throat. I looked down at the amount and felt my stomach drop. It was huge. Not my entire savings, but enough to get me back on my feet. I looked up at him. I can't take this. Sure you can, he said simply. I watched you bust your ass for years while your sister lazed around. You deserve better than this. Emily lost it. She let out a deafening scream and lunged forward as if she was going to hit me. But before she could, someone else grabbed her arm. I turned and almost laughed out loud. It was our other neighbor, Mrs. Hendricks. This was getting ridiculous. Mrs. Hendricks was a sweet old lady who lived 2 doors down, always baking cookies and gossiping about the neighborhood. And right now, she had Emily's wrist in a death grip. "You ungrateful little brat," she hissed at Emily. I heard it all through my window. "Your brother worked for that money. You don't deserve a single penny." Emily yanked her arm away. "What is this, a neighborhood intervention?" Mrs. Hendricks turned to my mother. "Shame on you. Both of you." She pointed at my parents. "Raising a daughter to be a selfish thief and punishing your son for being responsible? I should have known when you let Emily treat everyone like garbage all these years." My mother, still trying to play the victim, whispered, "You don't understand, Dash." Mrs. Hendricks cut her off. "No, you don't understand. You failed as parents." My father snapped. "That's enough. This is our family business, not some neighborhood spectacle." But it was too late. Because right then another voice joined in. "I don't know, man," someone called from the doorway. "Kind of sounds like you screwed over your own son and got caught." We all turned. And there, standing in the open front door, was Jason. Jason was my coworker. The guy I carpooled with. The guy who knew about my apartment plans because I talked about them every damn day at work. And behind him? 3 other coworkers. They had heard everything. Jason folded his arms and shook his head. "Damn, dude. I always thought you exaggerated about your sister, but this is next level." My mom turned to me, eyes wide. "Chris, tell them to leave. This is private." I met her gaze. And I smiled. "Why?" I asked. "You weren't ashamed when you stole from me. Why should you be ashamed now?" Emily seethed. "You're going to humiliate us in front of the whole neighborhood? You did it to yourself," I said simply. She lunged at me again, but this time Jason stepped in. Whoa, he said, blocking her. "If you lay a finger on him, I swear we'll press charges." That shut her up. Mr. Dawson cleared his throat. "So, Chris, what's the plan? Are you going to sue, or are you going to take my offer and leave?" I exhaled and looked around the room. My parents still frozen. Emily seething but powerless. My neighbors standing their ground. My coworkers, looking on like this was the best free entertainment they'd ever seen. I grinned. "Oh, I'm going," I said. "But first, I'm taking something else they don't deserve." And I knew exactly what that was. Silence filled the room after I said that. Emily looked panicked, my mom tensed up, and my dad's face turned red. They all knew I was up to something, but they had no idea what. I let the tension settle for a second before turning to Mr. Dawson. "I'll take the loan," I said, carefully folding the check and putting it in my pocket. "But before I go, I think it's only fair that I get something back that actually belongs to me." My father scoffed. "Oh, so what now? You're going to take the TV? The furniture? What else can you steal from us, Chris?" I grinned. "Not from you." I turned to Emily. Her smug expression faltered. What?" I reached into my pocket, pulled out her car keys, and tossed them in the air before catching them again. Her precious car. The one our parents had bought her for her birthday. The one she hadn't even paid a dime for. The one that was still legally registered in Dad's name. Which meant it wasn't really hers. I looked at my father. Since Emily never had to earn her own car, I think it's only fair that we sell this one to pay me back. You know, since you insisted on fixing things. Emily's eyes went wide. "No!" She turned to our dad. "You can't let him do that. That's my car." Dad hesitated. He was stuck. If he refused, he'd be proving in front of everyone that he never intended to pay me back. If he agreed, Emily would explode. And he knew I wasn't bluffing. "You gave him your money," Jason said. "That seems fair to me." Emily shrieked. It's not fair. I need my car. You didn't need my money either. I shot back. But that didn't stop you from spending it, did it? My mom grabbed Emily's arm. Chris, please. This is too much. I raised an eyebrow. Too much? You stole everything I had, and now it's too much if I take a little back? Mr. Dawson clapped his hands. Well then. Now that Emily doesn't have a car anymore, she finally has a reason to get a job. He turned to her with a courteous smile. Public transportation is always an option. Emily let out a full-body scream and stormed upstairs, slamming her door so hard it knocked a picture off the wall. I turned to my parents. Well, looks like that's settled. Dad sighed. Fine. Sell the damn car. But don't expect a dime from us. I laughed. Don't worry. I never expected anything from you. Mom shook her head and looked at me like I was some heartless monster. I can't believe you're actually leaving us over this. I looked at her, truly stunned. You're kidding, right? You stole from me. Lied to me. Betrayed me. And now you want to act like I'm the bad guy for refusing to be your doormat? She just looked away. I turned to Jason. You ready? Yeah, man, he said, patting me on the back. Let's get out of here. I grabbed my things, took one last look around, and walked out the door forever. Emily never got her car back. I sold it the next day. I used Mr. Dawson's check and the car money to finally get my own place. It wasn't my dream apartment, but it was mine. No more family drama. No more walking on eggshells. Just peace. A week later, I got a text from my mom. Emily wants you to apologize so we can put this behind us. We're still family, Chris. I didn't even bother to reply. Because some people? They're not worth forgiving. A month passed. A whole month without my parents. Without Emily. Without the constant gaslighting and guilt trips and excuses. And for the first time in years, I could finally breathe. I had my own apartment now. It wasn't the biggest or the nicest, but it was mine. My name on the lease. My hard-earned money paying the bills. No one could take that away from me. My parents tried to call a few times, but I never answered. Emily sent a single text. Hope you're happy, asshole. You ruined this family. I didn't respond. Then one night, the intercom in my building buzzed. I checked the camera. My dad. I sighed, debating whether to ignore him. But something inside me wanted to hear what he had to say. So I pressed the button. What do you want? Chris. He sighed, sounding tired. Can we talk? I hesitated, then stepped outside. I didn't invite him in. He looked me up and down, then shook his head. You really cut us off like that, huh? I crossed my arms. You made that decision when you stole from me. Dad exhaled and rubbed his face. Look, I know you're angry, Dash. I'm not angry. I interrupted. I just finally see things clearly. He scoffed. Oh, come on, Chris. We're family. Families fight. They work things out. I laughed. Is that what you told Grandma when Emily never paid her back? That shut him up. I shook my head. You don't get it, do you? This wasn't a fight. This was a breaking point. And you made your choice. You always chose Emily over me. Always covered for her. Enabled her. You never saw me as your son, just the backup plan. The reliable one. The one who wouldn't complain. Well, guess what? I'm done. Dad swallowed hard. So that's it? You're just going to erase us from your life? I met his eyes. No. You erased yourselves. He stared at me for a long time. Then he muttered. Your mother still cries for you, you know. Good, I said coldly. Maybe now she knows how it feels to lose something. Dad sighed, defeated. He turned and walked away without another word. And just like that, I was free. The next day I changed my number. Blocked them on everything. Moved on. Some people might think that's cruel, but here's the truth. Blood doesn't make a family. Respect does. And if they couldn't give me that? Then they never deserved me.